Hello everyone and welcome to ACCE's second quarter Education Attainment Division Community Webinar. My name is Ana Lydia Blakely and I am with ACCE's Education Attainment Division. Before we begin today's webinar on mobilizing employers to upskill their employees, I would just like to go over a few housekeeping items. I'll quickly begin by drawing all of your attention to a useful toolbar that you should see on the right-hand corner of your screen. This toolbar will help you manage your webinar settings and includes a chat box that enables you to submit questions to our presenters. After you hear from our guests today, we will dedicate about 15 to 20 minutes to answering your questions, and we will encourage each of you to utilize this chat feature. If you submit a question to our speakers, we may also try and allow you to present your questions directly to our speakers. Currently, you are all in listen-only mode, but if you enter the audio pin that is provided for you in your toolbox into your phone now, you'll gain audio access for the Q&A portion of our call. Should you decide to utilize this feature, we just ask that you please do not place us on hold at any time during the webinar to avoid any hold music disruptions. You will also notice that a copy of today's presentation and the documents have been uploaded for you to download directly from the toolbar. So lastly, please note that today's presentation is being recorded and that a copy of the presentation will be available within a few days on ACCE's website in case you'd like to revisit any portion of the presentation or share it with your colleagues. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and now turn things over to Bridget Nutter, who is the Director of Business Education Partnerships at the Los Angeles Area Chamber of Commerce, to kick off today's presentation.
Well, thank you, Ana Lydia, and thank you to all of our partners who've joined us from so many various communities around the country and the Chamber world. I'm really pleased and excited to be a part of today's conversation, and more importantly, to help kick off our discussion today on mobilizing employers to upskill their employees. So the purpose of today's webinar is really to engage all of our education partners around the country in a live discussion on how we as education leaders in our community can really help our members, employers in our various communities and sectors, really implement programs and policies that encourage their employees to pursue post-secondary education attainment opportunities. Today, we have several takeaways that we're hoping that we will all walk away with, one of them being why employers really play a key role in closing the skills gap around this issue. We're actually going to hear and learn from some really robust examples of employer-led initiatives that encourage degree completion and certificate completion. And then lastly, we're going to learn about some recent research on the high return on investment, that ROI that such initiatives yield. We're really excited to have today's webinar speakers, two partners that we've grown to know well in this work, who will share some really important resources, really timely and relevant resources that can be used by all of us to help us develop messages and supports needed to engage employers in our communities. So our flow for this morning, in terms of our speaker flow, first we will hear from Greg Latosa, our VP of Education Strategies at St. Louis Regional Chamber, and Greg will lead us in today's discussion with St. Louis's recently released Degrees at Work program and their employer toolkit. The toolkit is really employer-focused, very exciting for us to see, and utilizes practices being implemented by some of the most successful employers representing various regions and industries that are really geared to increase education, post-secondary education attainment. So it's filled with many adaptable models and resources that can be replicated in our ACC community, and we're really excited to learn more from him. Also joining us is Haley Glover, Strategy Director of Lumina Foundation, and we all know Haley has been a great supporter and visionary leader of this work, and she will follow Greg with some really exciting results from Lumina's recently released ROI study. She'll provide insight on a question we often hear from our members, and that is, what's the ROI on this investment? Why should my company make this investment? why is it really important for me to engage in this work? And then at the end, of course, we always want to leave time for Q&A, and we'll have our very own David Rattray, who's our Executive Vice President of Education and Workforce Development here at the LA Area Chamber, kick off our Q&A session. So to start, I want to share a few insights from research that we've engaged in here in the LA Area Chamber to help frame today's conversation on why it's important that we as chamber leaders in education really play an active role in promoting post-secondary education attainment. Why is it important for us to have messages that we can relate to our members and share with our members, and why do they need tools and resources to encourage their investment? So really kind of laying the groundwork and framing the conversation with some numbers and statistics on post-secondary education attainment. So our first slide that we're looking at really gives us a huge snapshot of what the actual completion rate is by degree. So we're looking at this graph and we see nearly a third of those who are represented on this graph are individuals in this country who are potential completers, but with 2 years progress or more. So they represent, of course, the minority part of the graph that we're looking at here. And as you'll see, the majority of our participants from this particular graph are potential completers who have been enrolled in some form of college multiple times and have less than 2 years progress. So really just kind of wanting to set the stage as to, as we look at our numbers of adults and young adults who are actually pursuing post-secondary education attainment and degrees, looking at where there are gaps and why it's important for us to be involved in the conversation to help move the gaps. So our second slide really lends even more. It breaks down kind of some Census Bureau data that we've compiled through our research here at the LA Area Chamber on the number of adults in this country. And for the purpose of this, a lot of our research, we're really focusing on the adult population, the working adult population, ages 25 to 64. And based on the last U.S. Census Bureau survey, we see that in the U.S. alone, there are, say, 27% of adults have a high school graduate degree. 22% have some college but no degree. 9% have an associate's degree, and 19% of those adults have a bachelor's degree. And so for the purpose of our research, as we look at employer needs and demands in the workforce, it's really important that chambers continue to play a key role in driving the economic growth and prosperity of our communities. And key to this is making sure that, of course, our employers have the talent and skills needed in their workforce to drive the innovation and creativity to remain competitive. And degrees do matter. So,
Bridget, this is Haley. I'm very, very sorry to interrupt. Could I make a quick statement?
Absolutely you can, Haley.
So this is Haley from Lumina. And as you know, Lumina traffics exclusively in this area of post-secondary attainment. If y'all want to take a look at luminafoundation.org, we've recently released a report called Stronger Nation, and that's our sort of annual State of the Nation report. This year, for the first time ever, we were able to count high-quality post-secondary certificates as a point along that attainment spectrum that were counted alongside associate bachelor's degrees, etc. We think this is actually really important because it's a measurement of one-year certificates with workforce relevance, meaning that the certificate holders are working in field and have an income equivalence of about an associate degree. So these are not like underwater basket weaving certificates or anything like that. We're not able to count certifications, those industry recognized or sub-associate certifications that are often given by a third party, those kinds of things, but we are on our way. But for a point of reference, in the United States right now, about 4.9% of the population hold a high-quality certificate as their terminal credential. So we have backed that amount out of the some college no degree number, and you actually have a United States attainment rate of about 45.3% in 2014, which is the latest census year available. So we also have that data available by state, and that's highly extrapolatable, if that's a word, to your region. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that report and study up on your certificate rates, because we're finally able to count them for the first time.
Well, that's really exciting.
Put that in there. Sure thing. Thanks.
And this is Anna. I'll make sure by the end of the webinar that it's a copy of that report is included in your toolbox.
So for the purpose of just one that we thought would be a really interesting takeaway for our partners joining us on the line, we looked at some of the scenarios here in California related to closing the degree gap by 2025, which of course is in line with Lumina's goal. And this graph on the screen is really an interactive dashboard that was created by California Competes. And it shows us how California's production of college degrees really changes in distribution by students and sectors, improvement in graduation rates, et cetera, et cetera. But the thing that was really most glaring for us as we looked at this, this particular graph was really noting that in order to really close the post-secondary education attainment gap in California, it's going to be really hard to eliminate that gap without focusing on that working adult population, say 20 to 39-year-olds. Those are typically those employees who are working in the workforce and who many of our employers and members depend on to drive their businesses and their organizations. So when we look at messaging and why is messaging important and why it's important for us to really engage with employers in a real significant role, and why our partners on the phone or why the information that they're sharing with us this afternoon is really critical for us, we know that employers really do play a key role. And we've reached out to our employers and engaged them and research that really provided us with a lens into what were some of the reasons that really was behind the driving of their investment in post-secondary education. It really was about talent, attracting the right talent in their organization. They really are looking to develop the skills and talent needed to stay competitive in their industries. They really do want to invest in training and education programs that will help them attract and retain that top talent. They want leaders in their organization to fill their pipelines that really represent their communities and their customer base. And they're also really wanting to look at long-term commitment engagement from employees, and they see investment in post-secondary as an opportunity to really increase employee engagement and connectivity for the long term. And then at the very end of the day, businesses have to make money. So for them, having those individuals that have the skills, the certificates, the degrees to really maintain their competitive advantage is about increasing productivity and driving new innovation in their organization and bringing new and creative ideas to the workplace. And they see education, post-secondary education, as an opportunity to really develop that and cultivate that. They want their customers, of course, to have the best experiences, because many of them depend on customers to drive their bottom line. And of course, they want customers who are going to be loyal to them and who know that they can really depend on the people who work for them to deliver. And then at the end of the day, managing and reducing budgetary constraints is really important. So the less turnover they have in the workforce, the better on the bottom line it is for them. But also, if they have employees who really have had the training and the education and the experiences to really to grow with the organization, they see this as a way to really fill their pipelines. And so for chambers, back to our role as we transition back to why this is important for us, we are organizations that work with various and diverse sectors of our community, all sizes, all sectors, all ethnicities. And these are members who typically trust us. They come to us for business solutions, and they look to us to play the role to bridge those relationships between the employer community and the education community. So having the opportunity to really leverage that role, knowing what are some of the alignments that we can actually help lead between business and education institutions is a key role of an intermediary like a chamber, and that we should leverage. Many of us have boards of directors through which we engage our C-suite executives in our communities and business leaders who are making decisions about post-secondary education. So having an opportunity to really utilize those spaces to engage those executives and leaders is really a unique role for chambers to play, and it's a way for us to really move the needle on this work. We all live in communities where there are emerging industries that really drive the need and the demand for new degrees and certifications and degrees. In Los Angeles, IT and healthcare are two of the lead trending industries, and we're finding that we're having to be really very hands-on, and there's a lot of engagement with our members in that industry about the work that we're doing to really cultivate talent to fill the high demand and high need jobs in those areas. Looking at how do we develop those sector-focused models of collaboration. Many of you in your communities are already doing great work around that. There are certainly more opportunity for us to be engaged in leading those efforts. And then as a voice of our communities and those who typically are advocating for businesses and policies that really impact the employer's bottom line, that is really a unique place that chambers can play. We all say there's power in numbers, so when we go to our legislators and when we're advocating on behalf of our businesses, we're not just speaking on behalf of our organization, but we're really lending that voice to speak to issues in our communities that really matter and that oftentimes really do get the attention of our legislative leaders, and that can make a difference on making those policy revisions, as well as hopefully at the end of the day providing more incentives for employers to be involved with this work. So with that, I know that was a mouthful. Really excited to hear from our speakers who have joined us on the line. And so we really want now to move forward and introduce Greg Latosa once again, who will share with us some really incredible work that they've done with their employer toolkit. And as we indicated before, it's work that we feel like can be really replicated in our communities throughout our ACCE community. And so Greg, I'm really happy and pleased that you're able to join us, and we'll now turn the conversation to you.
All right, thank you, Bridget. And I feel really fortunate to be given the opportunity to talk about our Degrees at Work initiative today. This is still kind of an ongoing developmental area for us and really trying to get this employer engagement in this very important initiative. And so I've been fortunate to meet the folks at Lumina Foundation and through ACCE and the Education Attainment Division to really kind of further develop our strategy. What I'll talk about today is really one kind of tactical resource that employers can use to think about how they can better support, particularly with the working adult population and going back to school. I'm really hoping that, I'll give an overview, but I hope that this is the beginning of a deeper conversation that we can have even after this call today, where we can really continue to think about specific strategies, and I'm hoping it helps with that in some capacity. The toolkit is again, one resource. I'll give a little bit of background before I start talking about its purpose and the major components. This really stemmed from some work that was being done by our Talent Council, which consists of a number of our major employers in the area. Back in 2012 and 2013, our Talent Council was really focused on exactly the points that have already been touched on a little bit today. We're thinking about the best way of increasing the talent of their workforce and trying to develop how they can ensure that talent development, talent attraction are key economic development strategies for the region, and looking at how they could upskill their employees and as a way of really adding value to their company. So they understood the value proposition for the company, and then also saw this as part of a larger economic development initiative for St. Louis. but they needed to gather some information first on the particular needs of working adults. They needed to gather some facts. They needed to identify the barriers for those who didn't finish their college degree, and try to figure out, tactical, practical practices that could be implemented within the workplace to support those employees. So we launched a survey back in 2012, towards the end of 2012, with about 4,000 employees. 4,000 employees actually received the survey, and 17 companies participated in that. So we used our human resource partners to kind of distribute the survey among their employees, and we're really focused on trying to identify specifically the barriers and opportunities that might exist within the workplace to increase attainment levels. And so what we found from that survey, at least in terms of the top barriers, was that there a lot of times was an environment at work that didn't allow for the flexibility to be able to pursue a degree. So a number of folks indicated that was a major problem. Tuition and fees were not affordable. The classes conflicted with work schedules. Class times were not convenient. Class conflicted with family responsibilities. So these are all things that were really identified by the folks who were taking the survey as major barriers. So we then, in response to that survey, tried to start developing some tools and resources that captured the barriers and opportunities that could exist. And so we produced a number of smaller collateral materials. What we heard from our HR leaders and our talent council was they wanted a more organized resource. And so that's what you see with the employer toolkit, which was developed back in 2014. So we're still working on trying to get more employers to adopt the toolkit. We shared it with our membership at the Chamber, but we communicated the purpose of the toolkit as one that would really foster positive changes in the workplace practices that would increase attainment levels for working adults. But then we also connected it to that larger initiative for St. Louis. So it was really supposed to be practically helpful for employers, but also wanted to make sure that this was one resource that can help connect folks to a larger movement that we're really trying to foster and lead here in St. Louis. So some of the major components of the toolkit, if you've had a chance to look through it, or if you just want to look through it briefly now, there's an emphasis on communicating a business case. There's different components that focus specifically on practices and policies that the company could implement to increase attainment levels. And then there's a scorecard towards the back that enables folks to kind of initially diagnose what practices they currently have and then identify ways of improving that. And I'll tell you, the scorecard was meant to be used for an additional purpose that I'll get into a little bit later as we kind of talk about the next steps. But what we did was we launched this among our membership. We have just over 1,000 members, and basically asked them to first identify a college advocate at their workplace who we could communicate more directly. We asked them to take an initial baseline assessment to enable them to get feedback on where they could improve, and then we were really focused on trying to get folks plugged into a network here at the Chamber that focused on this particular initiative. So we created some workshops to support it too, and we're going to continue doing that work. But if you had a chance to look through the toolkit, you notice that we've organized it according to 4 key sections and broadly labeled as encourage, inform, facilitate, and engage. We've talked about the importance of trying to, through the encourage section, really focus on incorporating learning into career plans and also recognizing and celebrating the completion of degrees. So really promoting that culture that celebrates college completion in the workplace. We also realize that folks who are thinking about going back to school are going to have all kinds of issues when it comes to thinking about how they're going to finance that education or how they're going to navigate the process for going back to school. And so making sure that there's information available to employees on financial assistance and credit and financial aid counseling, but then also taking a more direct role in actually helping to drive down costs through expanding tuition reimbursement programs or getting more employees to take advantage of those tuition reimbursement programs, and then ensuring the flexibility in the work environment to enable folks to be able to balance work and going to school. And then finally, looking at how we, through that culture that we hope would be embedded within the company that promotes learning, we really recognized in our survey results that folks wanted to know that there's somebody to walk with them through this process. So having a college advocate on staff who can really champion this initiative, helping provide mentors and engaging alumni, folks who have already completed degrees and who can help someone who's just thinking about it understand kind of the best ways that they're going to have to manage their schedule and some of the barriers and, again, opportunities that exist, we really felt like, peer-to-peer interactions are really going to help drive and inspire people to go back to school in many ways. So the toolkit, is again one resource. I'd be happy to go a little more in depth on some of the different pieces and components either today or after this conversation. What we're looking to do moving forward is further build a program to support this. So we're actively recruiting for a Degrees at Work program manager who's going to be focused on actually building the employer relationships and investing more employers in adopting the toolkit and actually using it on a practical level in their workplace. And then we're going to have, at least is what we envision, we're going to have a process in place where when an employer says we commit to Degrees at Work, they'll be able to call the chamber to get access to college advisors who can help working adults ask those initial questions as you're thinking about going back to school, and then connect them to the right higher education institution based on best fit, and asking, again, the right questions of the working adult who's looking to go back to school. And then we're really going to, I think, become a hub in the region in many cases in partnership with our higher education institutions on how you best serve adult learners in this working adult population. There's been a number of cases where our higher ed institutions have actually looked to us because they know that we're gathering data on this. They know that we have the toolkit as a resource, but looking to us to kind of provide information to them on how to even improve programs at the higher education level to try to support this population. So we really see this as a broader partnership both within the region among higher education institutions, employers, but then I can also say now that I've learned so much from what other communities are doing as well. And the toolkit itself was actually designed in many cases based on a number of other toolkits across the country that started identifying best practices for employers to increase attainment levels. And so in many cases, this is all part of, I think, a collaborative effort both within St. Louis and outside of St. Louis to try to continue to learn more and develop the best practices, again, that support this specific population. So with that, I'll be happy to talk about some of the challenges we've encountered too, and I think that comes a little bit later, but I think I'll wrap up for right now until there's additional questions.
Okay. Greg, if you want to share one or two challenges with us right now, feel free to, share out. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think one of the things that we've learned in this process is that you have to make it as easy as possible on the employer. So trying to make sure that when we say we want you to participate in this initiative and we want you to adopt the toolkit, that they have the full resources of the chamber to support them in doing that work. And so that's why we decided to actually build a program to provide a number of different services to employers, because we realized that we couldn't just offer them the toolkit and ask them to implement it within the workplace and just have that be kind of the last step that we take with them. We knew that we really wanted to provide a value add to the companies who say that they want to participate. We also learned through our engagement with our HR leaders that it was just, in many cases, it was too much to ask for the college advocate at the workplace to do a lot of the research on programs that would support employees who are looking to go back to school and really have to manage another full-time job in addition to what they're already doing at the company. And so that's one of the things that we've learned as the initiative would further evolve would be really critical, is that the chamber actually provide some more tactical support and getting even into the space of providing that navigational coaching through college advisors is something that it wasn't necessarily at the forefront of our mind initially, but that, based on what we've heard and learned from our partners, we recognize will be an important resource moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Very interesting. Appreciate your sharing, Greg. And I think there was one word that you used pretty frequently throughout your sharing part there with us, and that was how important it is for us to make sure that we're supporting employers, that we're really providing them with those hands-on resources and tools to make it easy for implementation to take place. And that support continues throughout the process. It's not a one-and-done approach at all. So, wow, right. Very, very robust work that you're doing there, and we really do commend you and just want to continue to learn from you as well as the others. For our partners who are joining us on the line, we will have time for Q&A at the end of our our discussion. And so just wanted to remind you that as questions come up, please do jot them down so that you're prepared and we're ready to engage in that process once our discussion with our speakers is concluded here. And so with that, we'll transition on to Haley Glover, who's joining us from Lumina Foundation. And Haley, we'll turn this time over to you now. So welcome, Haley.
Oh, terrific. Thanks, Bridget. So, hi, everybody. I am very excited to finally be able to talk to you about this in real time. I have been talking about this particular body of work for what I feel like is years and years, but it's actually only about 1 year. I did a session at last year up in Montreal, or wherever in Canada we were with the ACCE conference. So anyways, we actually have taken quite a bit of advice from you in that, talking with you, you've identified what are the key problems in, trying to get employers to actually not just support your work, but figure out how they can actually contribute to it. How do they drive credentials? How do they support credentials? And how do they make make it easier, make it more logical for their workforce to go back to college to attain credentials? And one of the key reasons for why employers were not particularly active at the table or didn't feel quite so inclined to maybe expand their investments was that because there were really very, very few examples of return on investment. And this is pretty reasonable. We know actually from some research that other organizations do, somewhere between 2 and 5%, maybe 8% at the total outset, outside of that range, even study the ROI of their current investments. And these are investments like tuition reimbursements and assistance programs, those kinds of things. We decided because there is so much money tied up in this, we would take a very straightforward look at this body of investment, the tuition investment in particular, to say what is the actual return on this? Does it have the benefit that we think it does? And if employers are spending billions of dollars, quite literally, employers spend $177 billion every year on formal education and training, of which maybe $30 billion is associated with tuition reimbursement and assistance. That is a pretty large chunk of change. And if you're going to spend it, you should know why, and you should know what you're getting, so you can make informed decisions when times get rough. Is this what should be on the chopping block? Because as you know, when times get rough, this usually is the first thing on the chopping block. So what we did, we started working with Accenture, who are a brilliant consulting firm. We have actually international team with members in Columbus, DC, Boston, and India. And they were able to, with our insight and assistance, create a framework document, which you can see before you on the screen. What we wanted to do with this particular ROI study was go farther than other ROI studies that have been put out there in the past have gone. And what we've seen with other ROI studies, with no shade, of course, against them, is that they're typically not ROI studies at all. They're actually value statements. So that you see quite a few, particularly those that were done in between maybe 2010 and 2012, which sort of was a little bit of a heyday of that, were statements of, yes, this program has a benefit of $70 million, or this program has a benefit of $30 million. And what you didn't see was what it cost, which of course is really important when you're measuring ROI, which actually requires a denominator. And so that's what we set out to do. We wanted to create as robust a framework as possible to measure all of this stuff. So saying it's not just revenue generation, it's not just cost avoidance, and it's not just training and opportunity costs, it's this whole thing put together. And even within these factors, we want to study things like the indirect benefits, and we want to study operational costs, and talent management costs, and productivity costs where we can. To do this, we created a statistical model that would use all kinds of statistical methods, including regression, to identify the leading factors for return on investment. And I'll go into that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. But suffice to say, we went out with this really robust framework and solicited now 5 companies to participate in this study. Essentially what it meant, we signed ROI, or use a lot of acronyms, NDA agreements with these companies. So we were all protected. We developed secure data transfer protocols, secure file, personally identifiable information protocols, and review scenarios, and we're able to really create some very highly productive relationships with these companies. Cigna Corporation, which is a major insurance company, a Fortune 90 insurance company, which is on the verge of a merger with another joining insurance company, Anthem, which I can actually see here from my office window here in Indianapolis. And we decided, working with Cigna, that we would study their program, which they call it the ERB, or the ERP, the Education Reimbursement Program. Important going in to know that Cigna, can you turn back for 1 second with the slide? Cigna is a company of about 31,000 people. They have revenues of $30 billion and have a really long-standing, well-organized education and training program. However, they never really treated it like a strategy, despite the fact that their CLO, Karen Coker, is really, really well respected, very strategic-minded. They just never thought about their tuition program as anything that had a whole lot of strategic value, only that it was a benefit program that enabled them to be competitive with other insurance companies. Well, what we were able to study, and this is actually a lesson learned for us as well as for you, is that all companies are not Google. I think we had anticipated going into this study that many more companies would have access to and analytic capacities to measure the kinds of factors that we have laid out on this sheet. All in, what we were able to study with Cigna are the 3 factors that are outlined in red. So just 3 factors across this entire array. That's not due to lack of desire. Indeed, we really did want to study the the productivity factors, things like call resolutions within their call center. And we wanted to be able to study their engagement. We wanted to be able to study the risk avoidance, all of those kinds of factors. What we were able to study using the data were promotions, transfers, and turnover. And those 3 factors taken together, along with the cost, if you'll turn to the next slide, resulted in a return on investment of 129%. Which I think is a pretty awesome return on investment, to say the least. Really important to note, once again, that Cigna hadn't really treated this like an investment at all. In fact, it was just a benefit program that many people had taken a part of. About 6% or so over about 3 years of their workforce had taken part in it. They actually never did study the number of people who have completed their credential, and so that is something that we were somewhat disappointed to learn, but has become actually a pattern over our other study partners, where very, very few employers actually track the completion of a credential, only the participation in the program. And indeed, very few employers that we've worked with were actually able to tell us where a individual in the company had started from an educational attainment perspective. So even though they might have required it in the job description, and they might have required it in the resume, it never got transferred into the employee's record. So that is something that we are pursuing in terms of a strategy, because it's pretty important to know where you're targeting your resources. Because what we don't want to do is call these ROI studies a, how do I put it, a privilege generating kind of strategy. We do know that amongst Cigna employees, about 60% of the people who are taking part in the benefit program are those who are looking at their first degree, meaning they're people who are not studying in graduate programs. But we did have a really healthy population of people who were studying for their master's or above, indicating that some of the dollars were going to support the second, perhaps third and fourth credential programs. which of course are valuable from the workforce perspective, but from our attainment goal perspectives, we're looking at the first degree. So it's just something to keep in mind as you're looking and as you're talking with your employers. Ask them what proportion of their workforce is what we would consider frontline or non-degreed, and see if they're able to tell you. And if they are, let me know, because I will want to talk with them. So anyways, like I said, we have 129% ROI, which you'll read here, means that they got their original dollar back. Every dollar they spent, they got that dollar back, and they saved another $1.29 in these talent management costs. What that really factors down to is that participants in the ERP were 10% more likely to gain promotions, which from my perspective is actually the most solid indicator of value on the part of the employer, because if they didn't have the skills, they would not get promoted. They were 7.5% more likely to transfer laterally within the organization, which means they were not only open for more other opportunities at the same level of employment, but they were able to take on other responsibilities that maybe did not result in formal job transfer, which of course saves the company a boatload of money. And very importantly, from your perspective as you're talking with employers, there is this myth out there that, you know, if you train them, they will go. And the truth is that's not true. If you train them, they're actually, at Insignia's case, 8% more likely to stay. And this was, of course, true across all levels, and even more true the higher up on the educational spectrum you get. So I think it's really important for people to start dispelling that myth that talent investments are wasted investments, because indeed there is that old adage, you know, what happens if you train them and they leave, and what happens if you don't train them and they stay? So here we are. Important from an individual perspective, the front line, which is the level of employee at the first and second levels within the organization. So you're talking about your call center employees, your early career, your assistance kind of occupations. They achieved a 43% higher incremental wage gain than non-participants, meaning their wage gains, everybody of course sort of achieved wage gains over the time. Participants were 43% higher than non-participants. So this is not only paying off from the part of the company with 129% ROI, it's paying off from the perspective of the participant, the actual employee, which is centered to our missions and helping individuals achieve their potential. So we're very excited to be talking about this in a very concrete way with you finally, and want to let you know that we're going to be releasing another 4 studies over the next several months. I'm really excited about these. They're going to take a look at a variety of different industries and occupational sort of arrays. We'll be releasing a report in the next couple weeks here that will be actually a masked study. Our employer partner did not want to release their name, and that is totally reasonable, but they are happy to let us release the results. We're also going to be studying a healthcare company, a call center employer, and a bank. And so we will have coverage of a good number of industries and a good array of size organizations, different sized organizations. So by the end of the study, you shall have another additional 5 arrows in your quiver as you're talking with employers around why they should think about these types of investments. And again, indeed, they should think about them as investments, not merely line items, because anything that can return 130% is an investment. It's not something that just exists on the balance sheet. So with that, I'll turn it back to Bridget and company and answer any questions you might have.
Okay. Thank you very much, Haley. And to your point, you know, we have companies that invest in our organizations all the time, and having these types of resources available to share with our employers is really, really helpful for us in terms of helping us to advance our conversations and develop messaging and tools that will encourage more employers to invest in this work. So with that said, I know we have a number of people on the line who are anxious to jump in with Q&A, and so I want to introduce now David Rattray, who is our Executive VP of Education and Workforce Development, to kick off our Q&A session. So David.
And before David kicks off our Q&A session, I would like to invite all of you to submit questions now for any one of our presenters using the questions chat feature in your toolbar. If you've also entered your audio pin, you can go ahead and raise your hand if you know how to do that, and I can unmute you so that you can present your question directly. So go ahead and please do that now, and I'm going to hand it over to David to kick us off.
Thanks, Anna. And do we have any questions in the queue already, Anna? No.
Not
okay.
at this time.
So as you guys are getting your questions ready, I'll address a couple of them. So maybe my first one will go to Greg. So Greg, how do you underwrite this work? And going forward, what's your challenges in terms of trying to make sure that you have the time and your team to advance the work?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that developing the structure that we need to actually serve the population that we're talking about. You know, when we talk about the number of working adults or the potential working adult student, we're really looking at close to 600,000 people in St. Louis who are either a high school graduate with no degree or some college but no degree. And so there's huge opportunities to get our employers engaged, but that also requires, if we're going to do it right and if we're going to be broadly accessible to the employers that we're going to really get to pledge commitment, I think it's going to obviously require us to kind of find creative ways to get resources to support, you know, the continued growth and development of the program. So we have a number of partners right now who are, you know, invested in our education and talent work in general, and they've helped us to kind of create a budget to resource this particular initiative. And we've also had help from the Lumina Foundation and ACCE through an attainment grant that we have right now that's actually enabling us to hire the degrees at work program manager that we're recruiting. And so again, this is all part of my earlier statement about, you know, trying to find interesting ways of collaborating both within St. Louis and outside of St. Louis. But our higher education community is engaged in this work too, and so I think there's opportunities moving forward to see how we can more efficiently and effectively build up the program and continue to expand the number of advisors and resources we can offer as we do that.
That's great.
Thank you, Greg. And Patrick Murphy, I see that you're on the line and you've raised a question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you now so that you can present your question directly to one of our speakers. Go ahead, Patrick.
Oh, okay. Fantastic. Well, first off, thank you so much to all the speakers today. This information has been fantastic and really informative, so thank you. The question that I did have is, you know, does anyone have a website or platform available that lists certain companies in your particular region that may have upskilling programs? And if they do or they don't, do you see value in having that information out there for the community to see?
This is Haley. Patrick, to my knowledge, hey, how are you doing?
I'm good.
Good. Hey, so I actually don't know of any platforms that are out there like that. Typically, and we found this, is there is I think a pretty strong culture out there that says, you know, this, because it's not an investment, because it's a benefit, you know, it's really for access for current employees only, right? Because you're not treating it like a public asset, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a problem. To tell you the truth, it's a big problem, because then you're not talking about how to leverage. You're not talking about how to stack with state support and how to really move the needle. Particularly in some of the sort of more creative financing things that you're seeing pop up with particularly returning adult-led initiatives like what's happening here in Indiana. So I would say, though, that we do have a sort of big experiment happening with the leadership of Bridget Strickler and Dan Ash down in Louisville. You all might remember Bridget in her former role as an executive over at the Louisville Chamber of Commerce. She's joined Dan to create what they're calling the Talent Alignment Survey, and that is a community, regional level survey that's been designed to help community orgs like chambers really understand the assets that employers are putting on the table within a community, taking this really private information and making it public. And so that is probably not ready to scale yet, but if you are interested in it, I would love to put you in touch with Bridget and Dan to see how we might get it to JAX.
Absolutely.
And Patrick, let me just add this, David Rattray. The research that Bridget referenced, Haley and Lumina helped us do. We did profile a bunch of companies both in the LA region but also across the country, or at least a lot of them were Fortune 50 companies, so they're in your markets too. Mm-hmm. So the report's in your, it's on your resource tool. So that's one place where we have done a little bit of that. I guess I could just add, I think Greg's probably done some of that. I think it does help, by the way. So I think part of your question is there a role for chambers to play? I think there is. You know, our experience, like most of you, companies are hyper competitive, as I say to Alicia. So their normal competitive instinct is to just not share. You know, all things being equal, don't share. Mm-hmm. But chambers are a place where they actually trust us, right? With, you know, they'll tend to share with us stuff they wouldn't necessarily just share openly anywhere. And they also, I think, trust that we do smart things with stuff they share. We don't just, you know, expose things in ways that become damaging for them or costly or whatever. So it's an important question, I think. I think we need to all learn more about how can we be a sharing platform so that they can learn. We do it in a bunch of other things that we all do. I think that's part of why you're asking that question. So I hope we all stay with that idea. I think that's a very important question. Anna, is there another question queued up?
So I invite all of you to go ahead and submit a question or raise your hand.
So Greg, do you want to add to any of those answers for Patrick's question?
You know, I think that you all have kind of, you know, communicated what might be available in that. I mean, we're still growing to kind of develop understanding of that as well. But I will say the Chamber is in a unique position, at least with our initiative, to bring companies together to kind of share best practices, and the toolkit helps to create that conversation too. So I would say that definitely using the Chamber as kind of the sharing network makes a lot of sense.
So Greg, a question I would have is when you first rolled out your toolkit, you know, toolkits are kind of interesting. I mean, everybody knows the reference of a toolkit, so it's an easy kind of label to put on top of something that feels, you know, feels good. Some toolkits people like jump at, and they're like, oh, I gotta have it, and they're using it, and you can tell they're using it, and they're willing to pay you for it, or other things that are good. Other toolkits, you know, you just can't tell. I mean, did anybody even use it, and even get much feedback? Give us a little very specific, like, what kind of feedback and evidence did you get when you put your toolkit in play or as you use it now?
Yeah, I think that was a point that I was trying to touch on in terms of how our initiative kind of evolved, because what we found is that you can't just you know, distribute a toolkit and say that it's important that you recognize the value of your company and using it. I will say this, Lumina Foundation's work in trying to really nail down the ROI will be very helpful, I think, moving forward in terms of our own communication strategy, because while we were communicating it, we have clear facts, evidence to support it in a way that may enable us to better sell, like the implementation of this toolkit, because it is connected to the value for the company. What we, you know, I think are a number of folks really embraced it. They identified the college advocates who we then communicated with to really think about how it could be best implemented in the workplace, and we're working to kind of understand how it's being utilized. But we also know that, you know, we need an infrastructure here to kind of manage that process too, because we need to be able to, years from now, say how this program actually led to folks enrolling in college and completing degrees. And I think right now, you know, that's something that we desperately need, is to be able to track our progress and the usefulness of the utility of the toolkit too. And so we anticipate at some point launching a new version of the toolkit. We haven't, you know, started creating it yet, but we see this as an iterative process. So we intend on kind of developing this with our partners who are giving us good feedback on what's working and what's not working within it. But we need a more systematic way of tracking, I think, moving forward, and that's how our program is going to function in many ways, our Degrees at Work program that we're creating.
So, Greg, I have another question. So when we presented the findings to the fellows in Indianapolis last round, some of our fellows said, you know, how do I broker between the employer community and a lot of our community colleges or post-secondary partners? It's not an easy world to walk back and forth. You touched on this early in your presentation, that once you started compiling a lot of really meaningful data, your post-secondary partners seemed to understand that was important. Can you go one layer deeper? You know, how did you broker that role, and what was the value that people saw on the post-secondary side?
Yeah, I think our post-secondary institutions, as part of our higher, so at the Chamber we convene a higher education council, and they were very invested in this overall top 10 initiative that we launched to see St. Louis become a top 10 region for educational attainment. And they were communicating with our business partners through the Talent Council. So there were a number of joint sessions and collaborations between the folks in our business community and the higher education community. And I think that they really understood that the larger movement was important. What I think higher education institutions see is that, you know, obviously by partnering more effectively with employers, they can reach more students, enroll more students, and you know, if there's employer engagement and support in this process in a collaborative way, you're going to increase persistence and attainment rates too, which I think also reflects well on higher education institutions. But you know, if on a very practical level, we made sure that our higher education institutions shared with us the point of contact at their institutions who would deal directly with adult learners. And once an employer said that they were pledging commitment to Degrees at Work, they were able to access, you know, that list of resources, so that if the college advocate's working with an employee who says, I want to go for this evening program in X area, they could maybe help that employee to think about the options and then connect them directly to the higher education contact, because they made themselves available and they were working with us in partnership on this initiative. Plus, we also communicated that higher education institutions are also employers, and so making sure that they recognize that there's a benefit for them to invest in their employees and increasing attainment levels for them, I think was something else. It wasn't just saying that higher education has a clearly distinct role and employers do. There's, you know, crossover too.
Wow. Okay, Greg, thank you so much. And we wanted to, of course, before we close out, we want to be mindful of time. We're right about three minutes prior to closing out. Haley, just wanting to transition back to you and see if you had any last takeaways that you would want to share with our participants who are on the call today in terms of, you know, really helping us to message this out and help move the needle and informing our members more about the ROI, how they can better leverage that.
Sure. Well, I'd actually say in congratulations to Greg, because while we didn't actually know this was going to happen, we had no idea what our results were going to be. We were hoping desperately, actually, that our results were going to be positive with our ROI study. We didn't know for sure. But I mentioned pretty extensively that Cigna had really treated this like just a transactional sort of benefit program. They hadn't really directed it. They hadn't done a great deal of promotion of it. They hadn't really thought about it as a real lever to drive their talent needs. As a result of the study, what they've done is essentially mirrored the kinds of things as Greg's talking about with his guidebook and his toolkit, right? They moved from a one-size-fits-all reimbursement policy toward reimbursing or toward assisting at very high rates the kinds of positions that are actually relevant for their workforce. They've gone from giving very, very little sort of tactical and guidance advice to potential students to having people like these education concierges that Greg's talking about on site. And they've moved from and I think this is actually very important, they've moved from a reimbursement model to a post-completion model, meaning that the individual who's often making, you know, less than $30,000, $40,000 a year, in some cases less, doesn't have to put the money up front, which is a real deterrent to participation. So if that's validation for your utilization of the toolkit, this company worth $30 billion and probably covering our insurance for many of us is doing the kinds of things that Greg's talking about. So it's real and it's worthy, and I think you should all really take advantage of it. To the degree you use the ROI study, fantastic. We'll keep you posted through the EAD as these results come out, and please don't hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions about the statistical model or even potential other companies for study. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Haley. And this is Anna Lydia Blakely with ACCE's Education Attainment Division. Just want to give a big thank you to our speakers on the call today, Bridget, Haley, and Greg, and David. Thank you so very much for joining us and sharing information about what Chambers can do to mobilize employers to increase post-secondary education attainment. Just so our audience knows, if you're interested in connecting with Greg and Bridget to learn more about what St. Louis and the Los Angeles area chamber is doing, I can certainly connect you with them. My email is listed on your screen. And you'll notice on your screen as well that we've got various other resources for you to utilize if your chamber's looking to implement this type of work. So in addition to one-on-one consultations, we have developed a new Chamberpedia page on this topic. The URL is provided for you on the screen, but if you would like a hyperlink to that, I can email that to you as well. On that Chamberpedia page, you will find links to Greg's employer toolkit, and you'll also find a report that David had referenced earlier that LA has done. And also you'll find a copy of the Lumina Foundation's ROI study as well. And as I mentioned earlier on the call, all of these documents are also provided for you within the handout section of your toolbar. And lastly, before we close, just want to highlight our annual convention. As most of you are already really well aware, we offer a full education and workforce development track. But the exciting thing is that Haley will be moderating a discussion on the ROI piece. So if you're interested in digging deeper into that discussion, be sure to register for our convention. It'll be held in Savannah this year. But again, thank you all, and hope you have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you, Anna Lydia.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Haley.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.